overarching theme for today's class is the discipline of simplicity. Now, I want you to grab Ortberg's book. He has a chapter in this text on what he calls the discipline of secrecy. He's got an entire chapter here on the discipline of secrecy, as he calls it, the practice of secrecy. This is chapter 10. Why is it, he writes on page 158, why is it that we often respond so strongly to criticism? How do you find yourself responding when someone criticizes you? Or when you hear that somebody has been critical of you? What kind of response does that elicit? He says here, our response to criticism reveals a secret addiction in many of us. This addiction has nothing to do with chemical dependency, substance abuse. There's no 12-step groups to help people fight it, nor any Betty Ford treatment centers in which to detoxify. Now here's what it is. I refer to what might be called approval addiction. Next line, so key. Some people live in bondage to what other people think of them. I think that's true. This is why the discipline of simplicity leads to freedom. Some people live in bondage to what other people think of them. Now that's something you could journal about. How deeply, for example, how deeply is my own understanding of who I am in terms of my strengths and weaknesses wedded, joined to what other people think of me? Am I addicted to what other people think of me? Do I dress in light of what other people might think of me? However I might choose to dress. Do I choose my words in terms of the impression they can make on another person? Approval addiction. He says the addiction takes many forms. If we find ourselves getting hurt, often getting hurt, adverb important, if we find ourselves often getting hurt by what others say about us, by people expressing other than glowing opinions about us, we probably have it. Approval addiction. If we habitually compare ourselves with other people, if we find ourselves getting competitive in the most ordinary situations, we probably have it. If we live, now think about this one for a minute. These are hard, because I think we all struggle to a certain extent with approval addiction. So he says here, if we keep trying, if we live with a nagging sense we aren't important enough, a nagging sense we aren't important enough or special enough. Or we get envious of another's success. We probably have it. If we keep trying to impress important people, we probably have it. So wouldn't it be wonderful to be freed from people's expectations in that sense of constantly trying to gain their approval so that our life is sometimes validated? Okay, now we're going to go through this overhead that has to do with simplicity. Okay, let's start off with some text. If you have a Bible, turn over to Matthew 6. Okay, this is from the Sermon on the Mount. I've highlighted a long passage from Matthew, and the key verse that I want to read to you is Matthew 6:33. Matthew 6:33 is at the heart of simplicity. Seek first the kingdom of God and his what? Seek first his righteousness. Seek first his kingdom, and all of these other things will be given to you as well. And all of the other things that Jesus is talking about are the kinds of things that we become anxious about. As Jesus puts it, you become anxious about money. You become anxious about your clothes. Don't be anxious about these things. I'll provide what you need. He doesn't say, I will make you wealthy. He says, I will provide what you need, but seek first the kingdom of God and God's righteousness. That's the heart of simplicity. Simplicity clarifies our vision. Kierkegaard comes right in at this point. Purity of heart is to will one thing. And that one thing for Kierkegaard is what? Seek first the kingdom. So simplicity is a matter of allegiance. It's a discipline that has to do with our fundamental allegiances, our fundamental devotions, what's at the heart and core of what we're about. And I'm telling you, one of the reasons why money is so tied in with the discipline of simplicity, how we use our money, what we spend our money on, how much money we give away, and so on, is very closely related to who we really are. To who we really are. We can't lie at that point. Take a look at Luke 12 up here. That's the story of the rich fool. And Jesus' comment after he's told the story of this man who had many barns and he was blessed and he tore down his barns saying to himself, now I can relax, I'm safe, I'm secure for many years. And God says to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. And then Jesus tells the parable, and then Jesus says this is the heart and core. A person's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That's the heart of the matter. The meaning of our lives do not consist in the abundance of our possessions. They don't. Let me add something here. The purpose and abundance of our life is determined by how well we love. That's what it's determined by. So a couple of other things. So we have, with the discipline of simplicity, when you think duplicity, remember the duplicitous person is the person who tries to live in two worlds simultaneously. The duplicitous person is that spiritual chameleon whose color changes depending on the group he's with. Duplicity is the antonym for simplicity. The simple person is not someone who has a low intelligence quotient. The simple person is someone who's decided what she is about and has chosen to place the kingdom at the center of her being. And the kingdom being at the center determines her yeses and her nos. She's substantial. She's weighty. Moving on here. So we have two terms coming up here. The first is inner simplicity, and the next one on the overhead is external simplicity. Internal simplicity, external simplicity. You can think of a circle, and at the center of that circle is internal simplicity. What is internal simplicity? Seeking first the kingdom. That's what it is. It's saying to Jesus Christ, Lord, I wish to seek with a single eye your kingdom. So, internal simplicity comes first. We don't start talking about money or the kinds of cars we're going to drive or those kinds of issues first. We talk about to whom are we willing to give our allegiance. But, now here's the point, external simplicity flows out of internal simplicity. If I'm seeking first the kingdom, if that's at the heart and core of who I am, that allegiance, that focus, that devotion will reflect itself in how I choose to live concretely from day to day. You with me on that point? Does that make sense? One would naturally lead to the other. Now, this is one of the reasons why I find that health and wealth gospel so repulsive, to be direct. God does not promise us that we will be wealthy, but he promises us deep fulfillment. Deep fulfillment as we learn to love. So the dynamic would be, this is a fundamental principle of spiritual formation. The external is always rooted in the internal reality. The external is always rooted in the internal reality. The way that Jesus spoke of this was, by their fruit you will know them. By their fruit you will know them. What does he mean? A person might have a lot to say about what they believe. You'll be able to tell what they believe by how they behave. That's Christ. You'll be able to tell the truth of their words by how they're behaving. So, inner simplicity, external simplicity. Now, see, this spiritual discipline, whether it's the discipline of secrecy, as Ortberg calls it, or the discipline of simplicity, leads to freedom. Freedom from the self. So, for instance, we don't have to be incessantly clamoring for attention, applause, recognition, and so on. Let me ask you some questions. These are not from the book you're reading by Foster, but they're from a study guide. This will help us get a gauge by how deeply we're tyrannized by ourselves. And the first two just beat the heck out of professors. Number one, something like this. Am I pretending to be an expert where I'm only an amateur? The operative word is pretending. Pretending. Am I pretending to be an expert where I'm only an amateur? How about something like this? Do I really read the books I quote? Whack! His point is, oftentimes we can be talking about books and expounding upon books, and we never cracked the cover. We just heard what somebody else said, or we read a review somewhere and thought, oh, that's good, I can impress somebody with that. Pretending. Now, this next question, I think, is a helpful one. Do I give the impression of being more godly or more profane than I really am? That's interesting, because we thought we'd just stop with godly, right? Well, some of us do give an impression of being more godly than we really are, but some of us, depending upon the group that we're with, our colors change, and we become more profane than we really are. That's duplicity. Foster writes this is a good one. Instead of becoming good, we resort to all sorts of devices to make people think we're good. That's duplicity. He says in his chapter on simplicity, stop trying to impress people with your clothes and impress them with your life. I like that. All right. Last, freedom. Simplicity leads to freedom from things. Now here I mean freedom from ostentatious living. Freedom from buying something because of the impression it creates on another person or group of people. Here are the questions. Am I living within my income? And all of you say, of course we are. We're college students. We have no choice. But someday you might have a choice. Am I living within my income? Here's one that we all can face. Am I a compulsive buyer? When things start to not go so well, do you head off to the mall? Just kind of wandering around there? I know if I just bought, I know I'd feel better. Oh, I can just feel it in the air. Happiness is in the air. I'm at the mall. And finally, do I buy what I can afford and my responsibility to the poor suggests as appropriate?